It's September 19th, 1944. A cold, damp fog blankets the fields near Arracourt, France. The ground is slick, the air heavy with tension. Inside a mud-splattered Sherman tank, First Lieutenant Merwin Men of the 37th Tank Battalion clings to the rim of the turret, eyes scanning the mist ahead. His gunner peers through the periscope, straining to see movement in the grey nothingness. Somewhere out there, the feared German Panthers are waiting. Tanks so heavily armored that American shells often bounce off them like pebbles against stone. What Men and his crew don't realize is that inside their tank, nestled among the familiar shells, are 6 rounds unlike any they've ever fired. 6 M93 high-velocity armor-piercing shells, HVAP they're called, with tungsten cores capable of cutting through even the thickest German steel. Those 6 rounds would change everything about how the Sherman fought, and in that fog-covered French battlefield, they'd prove that American tanks, once mocked by their own crews as Ronson lighters, could take on Germany's most feared machines and win. But to understand how those 6 shells ended up in Men's tank, we have to go back not to Europe, but to the laboratories and test ranges of the United States, where engineers and metallurgists were racing against time to solve a deadly problem. Early in 1944, American planners were forced to face an unpleasant truth. The M4 Sherman, the workhorse of the U.S. Army, was outclassed. Its 75V limited gun couldn't penetrate the new German tanks. Not frontally, not even at point-blank range. When the Allies landed in Normandy, American tankers expected to fight Panzer IVs. Instead, they ran headlong into the Panther, a tank with a long-barreled 75 mid-wit gun, thickly sloped armor, and an effective frontal thickness of nearly 140mm. The result was catastrophic. German rounds bounced off Panther hulls like stones off a wall. Panther rounds, meanwhile, could destroy a Sherman from more than a mile away. By the time reports reached Eisenhower's headquarters in July 1944, the frustration was boiling over. Eisenhower himself reportedly exploded, saying, "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out? I thought it was the wonder gun of the war." It wasn't the gun that was the problem. It was the ammunition. American engineers had been working on a new type of round, one that didn't rely on sheer mass but on density and speed. They developed a projectile with a tungsten carbide core, one of the hardest substances known to man. Surrounded by a lightweight aluminum shell, the concept was simple: make the penetrator smaller, harder, and faster. The result was the M93 HVAP, a round that could reach speeds of over 1,000 ms, far faster than standard ammunition. It could punch through 160mm of armor at close range, enough to pierce a Panther's gun mantlet and ignite the ammunition inside. The problem: tungsten was scarce and critical. Every HVAP round required nearly a kilogram of it, and tungsten was needed everywhere. In tools, in aircraft engines, in armor plating, China supplied most of the world's tungsten. And even with American production ramping up, there was never enough to go around. By late summer 1944, only a trickle of these precious rounds had reached Europe. Tank crews were issued just a handful, 5, sometimes 6 per tank. They were told to save them for when it mattered most. And that moment came on September 19th near Arracourt. The fog that morning was thick as soup. German tanks from the 113th Panzer Brigade advanced in column, brand new Panthers fresh from the factory. Their crews young and eager, but inexperienced. They couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. What they didn't know was that American tanks were already in position, dug in and waiting. Captain Kenneth Lameson's C Company of the 37th Tank Battalion lay in ambush along a road south of the village. At about 8 in the morning, the first Panther loomed out of the mist, massive, hulking, its cannons swiving left to right. It was less than 75 ms away. Lameson's gunner didn't hesitate. The first HVAP round screamed downrange, striking the Panther's mantlet dead center. A bright flash, then an explosion. The tungsten core punched through the armor, igniting the ammunition inside. The turret lifted slightly, then settled sideways, flames pouring out of every hatch. 2 more Panthers appeared behind it, both destroyed in seconds. The survivors turned and fled into the fog, shocked that their supposed invulnerability had just evaporated. Across the sector, similar scenes played out. The fog that had blinded both sides now worked to the Americans' advantage. Panthers blundered into ambushes. Sherman crews, emboldened by their new ammunition, held their fire until they could see the faint outline of a German turret, then fired HVAP at close range. The effect on German morale was immediate and devastating. Panther crews had been taught that their tanks were nearly indestructible from the front. Now, with their mantlets suddenly vulnerable, confidence gave way to fear. By noon, reports were already reaching German headquarters. The Americans have new ammunition. They can penetrate our armor. Throughout the day, American artillery and P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers joined the fight. Once the fog lifted, German formations were pounded from the air. The Panthers, isolated and without proper reconnaissance or infantry support, were picked apart by coordinated attacks. When the Battle of Arracourt ended 10 days later, the result was stunning. The Americans had destroyed or disabled 86 German tanks and assault guns, while losing just 25 Shermans and 7 tank destroyers. The kill ratio was better than 3.1 against superior enemy machines. The psychological tide had turned. American tankers realized that with the right tactics and a few precious HVAP rounds, they could face the dreaded Panthers head-on, and that confidence mattered. A crew that believes it can win fights harder, faster, smarter. But the victory didn't come without limitations. The tungsten core, while deadly at close range, was brittle. At longer distances, over 1,000 meters, it could shatter on impact. Crews quickly learned to hold their fire until they could close the distance, aiming for mantlets, turret joints, or side armor. QVAP was powerful but not magic. Still, the psychological effect was enormous. American tankers no longer dreaded the Panthers as unstoppable monsters. They saw them for what they were. Dangerous, yes, but beatable. And in war, that belief is everything. When Germany launched its desperate counteroffensive in the Ardennes that December, the Battle of the Bulge, Sherman crews clung to that knowledge. Even as snow fell and supplies ran low, those few HVAP rounds gave them hope. In freezing forests and narrow roads, they used every trick they'd learned. Flanking, calling artillery, using bazookas and air support when possible. The fighting was brutal, but it broke the back of German armor for good. By early 1945, the tide had completely turned. German factories were bombed out, tungsten supplies gone, fuel depleted. Panther tanks, once symbols of German engineering might, sat abandoned in the mud for lack of gasoline. After the war, engineers studied the HVAP rounds that had played such a critical role. They found that while the shells had limits, particularly against the Panther's sloped glacis plate, they had performed exactly as intended. They gave the Sherman a fighting chance. The story didn't end there. When the Korean War began in 1950, Shermans armed with the same 76mm guns, and now with plentiful HVAP ammunition, faced Soviet-built T-3485s. This time, tungsten wasn't scarce. American tanks tore through enemy armor with ease. What had been a scarce miracle in Europe was now standard issue, and devastatingly effective for the veterans who'd fought at Arracourt. That vindication came with mixed feelings. They knew what a difference those 6 tungsten rounds per tank had made, and what more widespread supply might have done months earlier in France. But Arracourt's legacy went far beyond its battlefield. It reshaped how militaries thought about tank warfare. Lieutenant Colonel M1 Abrams, who commanded the 37th Tank Battalion that day, would go on to become Army Chief of Staff. And the M1 Abrams tank would bear his name. Its gun, its ammunition, and its doctrine all traced their lineage back to the lessons of Arracourt. Mobility, combined arms, and the right ammunition for the job. The German veterans who survived drew their own conclusions. They had seen what happened when technical brilliance met industrial exhaustion. The Panther was a masterpiece, but a masterpiece Germany could not produce or supply in the numbers needed to change the war's outcome. The Americans, with their vast industrial base, didn't need perfection. They needed quantity, reliability, and adaptability, and HVAP was the perfect symbol of that. On that foggy morning in September 1944, when Lieutenant Men's Sherman fired its first tungsten round, it wasn't just a single tank duel. It was the moment when industrial science, battlefield necessity, and sheer human courage intersected. A moment that proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, innovation and belief could turn the tide of war. And that's how 6 tungsten-cored shells hidden inside a single Sherman tank helped redefine the balance of armored warfare. Not by making the Sherman the best tank in the world, but by giving its crew something far more important: the power to fight back,